Saludos. It's your host, Gabe Morales. This episode is going to be fairly short because, to be honest, there's not much documentation on them, and they never had more than 50 members, if even that, as we soon shall see. The Familia Cinco formed out of all the prison chaos of the post-1968 shoe war. As many of you know, La M started in the late 1950s in the California Department of Corrections, and its aim was to take over all the prison rackets for Mexicano-Chicano prisoners. And they pretty much accomplished this by killing several Mexican and non-Mexican prisoners to make their case that they were ones not to be messed with. The widely accepted founder of the MA was Luis Jesse Huerba Flores, who was from Hawaiian Gardens, and he recruited just over a dozen of the most hardened criminals loyal to his cause that he could find to join his idea of a gang of gangs inside the California Department of Corrections, as first documented by San Quentin Sergeant Bill Hankins. The MA included many killers like Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena and Richard Richie Ruiz, both crime partners from the Bakersfield area, as well as Mike Ison from San Francisco and Pelon Moreno from Norwalk, who all put in work for the gang and claimed bodies, meaning that they made kills. The MA had many members from Maravilla, in particular from El Hoyo Maravilla, but they killed a guy from Maravilla named Tony Chacon, and this greatly upset many of the Maravilla gangsters, and it caused Tony's brother, Frank Chito Chacon, to join a new organization called the Nuestra Familia Mexicana. This group was started in secrecy by Gonzalo Chalo Hernandez from Bakersfield, who oddly enough was Cheyenne Cadena's cousin, as well as Little John Valdez from Little Valley, who was chosen to be the first padre, Freddy Gonzalez from San Diego, Black Jess Valenzuela from Oxnard, Colonia Chiques, Bruce Weddle Morgan from Clanton, and Robert Daira Medina from Paicoma. As you can probably tell, all of these original Nuestra Familia Mexicana leaders were from Southern California, not Northern California. In February 1968, MA member Robot Salas killed James Sonny Pena Delgado, who was born in New Mexico, but also claimed Maravilla. This further upset the Maravillas, as well as Nuestra Familia Mexicana members, who did not like the fact that the MA was preying on other Mexicano-Chicano prisoners and being bullies inside the Pintas. The MA then hit Philip Rebel Neri from Bakersfield, who was an NF associate and good friends with NFM leader Chalo Hernandez. This added more fuel to the fire. The final straw was on September 14, 1968, when Carlos Pieface Ortega stole a pair of shoes belonging to either Hector Mad Dog Padilla, San Jose, or his cellie, Manuel Benito Romero from Maravilla. I've heard both versions, but since they did not fit Pieface, he gave them to his crime partner, Robot Salas, who wore them proudly. Padilla and Romero then confronted Salas about it, and Salas pulled out a shank and told them that was none of their business and challenged them to fight. Robot quickly stabbed both of them, and Padilla and Romero were sent to the hospital for non-fatal injuries, while Salas was sent to the hole at San Quentin. This incident polarized the yards between the two sides, the MA and the NFM, and several more incidents happened that evening, as well as the next day on September 15th, which resulted in the death of an MA associate, Archie Cricket Gallegos, from a gang called Diamond Street. Most of the other wounded were MA, but some NF. Nuestra Familia Mexicana were also wounded, such as Juan Lips Valdez, who by that time was the new padre or leader of the NFM. And while all known members of both prison gangs were locked up on September 16th, which is Mexican Independence Day, that did not stop the victory cries of the Nuestra Familia Mexicana in the housing units, as this was considered their coming out party and honorary birthday. The two prison gangs have been at war ever since, although there was a short pause of on-again and off-again violence from 1969 to 1972. But when the NF killed MA icon Cheyenne Cadena in December 1972, that was pretty much the end of that. Although the end of hostilities agreements that came out of the Todd Ashker lawsuit also paused the violence in the California Department of Corrections starting about 2014 to 2016, when many of the NF and MA and other prison gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood and Black Guerrilla family were let out of the security housing units and made a respect for respect agreement in order to stay out of the SHU and control the main lines. But that may be changing now. Due to increased violence, the hands-off policy of the end of hostilities agreement is losing its effect. But that is a different discussion for a different time. The late 1960s to early 70s was also when the Texas Syndicate formed, and they made an alliance with Nuestra Familia Mexicana and Maravillas, were all opposed to Laime's tactics. These conflicts also resulted in the formation of even a different group called Familia Cinco, which was supposed to be set up like the five families of New York's La Cosa Nostra. The number one guy, a boss of all bosses, and founder of the Familia Cinco was David Pajarito, which means little bird, Corona from Maravilla in East L.A. I know of a gang worker who's still alive that did extensive intervention work with the Maravilla gangs of Los Angeles back in the late 60s, and he still remembers Corona as being a very handsome man and very charismatic leader. Members of the Familia Cinco lived in both Northern California and Southern California. But like I said, we're opposed to the tactics of the M and the Nuestra Familia. I'm going to name off some of the Familia Cinco members I've been able to ID, or at least part of their identities, that were found on a couple of roll calls, confiscated by the 1970s Prison Gang Task Force, which included my mentor, Robert Moco Morel. There was a Güero Aleman, a Manuel Alba, a Jaime Alvarado from Hayward. There was a Ray Aragon from Chiques, who I show was M in 1973, but then switched to Familia Cinco. I believe he was then housed at CMC East and later dropped out of all prison gangs. There was a Joe Austin and Alex Bernard. Neither one of those sound like Hispanic last names, so it's obvious to me that you didn't have to be Hispanic to join the Familia Cinco. There's a Marco Buelna. I don't think he was related to Frankie B. Buelna from Merced, but he was listed. There was a Robert Calvillo, an individual that was written as Cand Maez, but could be Candyman. It was David Pajarito Corona, who, as I noted before, was from Maravilla. There was a Robert Dorado. There was a Robert Fresquez. There was Michael Garcia from El Monte, who I show was a former MA sympathizer. There was Raymond Papone Hirsch from Hazard, who was one of the early MA members, but according to this list, switched to the Familia Cinco in 1972. I believe he was later killed, but I'm not sure if it had anything to do with that. There was Robert Leon, Joe Manjares, Juan Marquez, Robert Martinez, who I believe was from San Francisco and was on the NF hit list in 1977. There's a Daniel Chango Moran, Richie Blue Moreno, Art Mosqueda, Anthony Tony Ocon, who was killed by the Nuestra Familia on October 17, 1976, after the Familia Cinco had already been disbanded. There was a Tony Toki Ortega, Richie Dicky Bird Osorena from La Puente. It was Jesse Pina, who was named in a letter I'll read here shortly, that jumped ship from Familia Cinco to the MA. Here's an interesting name. I showed Richie Pinuelas from Brole on one of the Familia Cinco lists. Now, either it's a different Richard Pinuelas, who is not from Brole, as I'm pretty sure there wasn't two of them in that town affiliated with the MA, but it showed that he switched to Familia Cinco in 73 when this particular list was found, but later on became a member in good standings of La MA. So this is a case where, like I said, either there was mistaken identity, dual identity of two different guys, or that he thought about going to Familia Cinco, but was given a pass and was able to come back as a condition of staying with the Mexican Mafia. Nobody seems to be able to answer that question, why Richard Pinuelas appeared on a Familia Cinco membership list. There was Luis Quintana from Azusa, who I believe was killed post-1972. There was a Joe Ricardo Ramos. There was a Robert, a.k.a. Junkyard Bob Rosas from Azusa. There was an Ernie Neto Cedillo, who I believe was from Maravilla. Not 100% sure on that. If any of you Maravillosos know a guy named Ernie Neto Cedillo, let me know, but he was very close to David Corona. There was a Richard Silva, who was from Maravilla, was on the San Quentin main line in 1972. There was a Nick Sosa, who I don't believe is connected to the Sosa NF family. I believe this Sosa came out of Texas, and so more likely was a Texas Syndicate and Familia Cinco sympathizer. There's also notes that he had killed an NF, so was high on their hit list. There was a Blas from Solano County, a Donnie from Whittier, a Freddie, a.k.a. Buffer from Santa Ana, who was considered a Familia Cinco captain. There was a Gibby, possible first name of Gilbert. There was a Manuel Chachupin. There was a guy named Flaco, who's mentioned in this Huila I'm going to read here shortly. There was a German from San Luis Obispo. There was a Huera, who was the girlfriend of Pajarito Corona. There was a Shotgun from Cantaranos, and a Sluggo Valverde from Oxnard, Colonia Chiques, as well as a Lencho Ventura. So like I said, that's under 50 names at most, and some of those maybe they just counted as supporters and actually were not, such as possibly Pinuelas. I'm now going to read a letter by Corona written to his supporters. As you can see at the top, it's dated January 28, 1974. Hugo Neto. What's happening, brother? Anything new? Is Flaco still third, meaning third in charge? If he is, tell him his so-called homeboys turn cock, meaning they jump ship. They slowed out to Flaco's enemies, those vatos de la M, or the Mexican Mafia. That dude Jesse Pena kissed up to those dudes. I cut him and all his weak homeboys loose. La Familia Cinco sticks to themselves. We don't need anybody back in our play. My old lady Wera came up to see me and brought me my little boy to see me. He's big now. How's it going with you and Meg? I didn't put that down, but that's possibly another Familia Cinco associate. Did you get everything straightened out? Right now, they got me going to school and trade, which is all right, I guess. My old lady bought me a record player and a lot of oldies. I'm ready this year. Just hope you and some of the other canales drop in. Write me and tell me what's up there. I guess I'll make it short. A rato, carnal. Right soon. Tu carnal siempre debe Corona. And he signs it FC for Familia Cinco. So as you can see, if the Familia Cinco was a predecessor to the NF in the mid-1960s, how could they still be around in 1974 when Corona wrote this letter? That is the question I ask everybody who claims that the Familia Cinco was the father of the NF. My law enforcement sources, as well as non-law enforcement, who were around at that time, told me Corona's pleas for more support and to stop guys from jumping ship did not work. The MA only became stronger in the mid-70s, as did the NF, under the Babo Sosa regime, and the Familia Cinco soon fizzled out. Nobody can tell me what ever happened to Corona. Maybe some of you old-time maravillosos can. I hope you enjoyed this short episode and learned something new. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians.